Why, oh why, are kings sovereign in a kingdom? So it really has to do with the concept of immunity. You see, what you want is you want to have really like no tyrants in a judicial system, as in everyone is accountable for their actions. So when you have a democracy, what you have is judicial immunity. Now, this means that these judicial officers are immune from civil liability. I can't sue them, right? You try and good luck to you. So what ends up happening is you have actually a system of tyranny. Because tyranny, properly defined, would be where a person is denied the right to unobstructed access to peacefully and orderly petition the courts or the government to effect change. But that's exactly what these people do. These judges, they do case dismissed all the time, denying people the right to unobstructed access to peacefully and orderly petition the courts to effect change. So you can't sue these people, making them tyrants. In a kingdom, the king prosecutes all crime. The king punishes all crime. In fact, all crime is really a breach of the king's peace. So, in a kingdom, you understand that, crime is a breach of the king's peace. How does the king breach his own peace? He cannot. So, therefore, you have to have a man who is sovereign, right? Because he can't breach his own peace. And then everyone else, he needs to make sure that there's a system of justice and that no one can engage in tyrannical acts. So what about the judiciary that currently claims judicial immunity? So it turns out that historically, judges represented His Majesty the King. And His Majesty the King did give judges immunity. But he gave judges immunity in that if they're sued, he, the king, will take accountability, liability for their actions. Because those judges acted on behalf of the king. Not there's some immunity and you can't sue anyone and this is a magical act. But there also is one thing that the king wouldn't allow, and that would be for judges to engage in corruption. What would corruption be? It would be obtaining anything for private benefit with His Majesty the King's official acts. So now you have a system where judges can be sued. If they do something wrong, they can be sued in the form that you can sue the king. Or if they commit corruption, they can be sued and that you can sue them directly. Now you don't have tyranny. So how does this system of justice work? How do we have a trial? Well, again, the judge represents His Majesty the King. The judge presides over the trial. You then have someone who makes determinations of fact. That's called the jury. And then if there's like a criminal trial and there's a punishment, the punishment would again be a prison that would be owned by His Majesty the King. Therefore, you don't have tyranny because you don't have the king as judge, jury, and executioner. You just have the king as judge and executioner. Jury is a jury. And now the jury only makes determinations of fact. So if a, say criminal defendant wants to sue a jury for what? All they did is make the determination of fact that this person was guilty of such and such a crime. The only thing that I could think of that they could sue the jury for is for jury tampering. And if a juror takes a bribe, I would say that they should be sued. They shouldn't be subject to some kind of special treatment where they can't be sued. Right? Like everyone's actions should be held accountable. But you need to have this one person, being His Majesty the King, who's everywhere, right? I mean, all the judges, all the police officers, they're all His Majesty the King. If he was held criminally liable for all the acts of all these people, he would spend his life in prison. Like it's impossible that all these people wouldn't end up committing some kind of crimes while wearing the badge, right? With the amount of men that he has working for him. So he shouldn't be held accountable. And now you start to get a system where you don't have tyranny, right? What you have is you have one man who's the strong man in society who punishes all crime. And all crime is really a breach of the king's peace. Right? I mean, the king would probably love nothing more than to just vacation and enjoy life. But there's crime, and it's the king's responsibility. That's why he's the prosecutor, to stop crime. Right? That's a major part of what we want government to do. And what is crime? Right? That's the other thing, is like we have the legislature engaging in crime all the time. Crime is simply trespassing. If you're not trespassing, you're not committing crime. So we have the legislature right now, which is constantly trespassing because they're constantly saying that they're going to use someone else's authority, someone else's power, someone else's property, and control it. In a kingdom, you don't have this trespassing because the king uses his own property and controls it. Long live the king.